lowered the whole time.
Okay.
You actually get our best side, except for Sally.
Yeah.
All right, it's 11 o'clock, so I will call our work session to order. Clerk, if you would kindly call the roll.
Mrs. Amos,
Here.
Mr. Cole,
Here.
Mr. Reed,
Here.
Mr. Parrott,
Here.
Mr. Vincent,
Here.
Mr. Hunter,
Here.
Mr. Dwyer. Here.
Thank you very much. We'll welcome everyone and have a presentation lined up and ready. Dr. Mills, did you want to address council?
Yes, if I could, please.
Okay, typically we don't during work session, and we have a presentation, so you can have about 2 minutes.
That's all I need.
Okay?
Okay, from here is okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
I'm pretty loud. I've lived here about 15 years, and I've seen the flooding down by the bridge ever since I came. And I've wondered why it happens over and over, and the businesses get flooded out, and those poor folks that live down there along River Road get flooded out. And I just had a question more than anything else. I grew up in West Virginia, and we had a lot of flooding there when I was a boy. And actually, one of the local coal mines was owned by Armco Steel, and they were a great company. And they released their employees with their equipment, and they channeled the river out. That's been 60 years ago. Can't believe I'm that old, but it's been 60 years ago, and they've never had any flooding in that area since. And I wondered, I've spent a lot of time bicycling along the River Road Trail, the High Bridge Trail, and actually had the opportunity to take an altimeter out there a few years ago and get some ideas about what the altitudes were. It seems to me that there must be at least a 25-foot drop between downtown Farmville and High Bridge, which means that if that area were channeled out, and I've also ridden along the River Road, the creek is full, it's not a river, it's a creek, it's full of brush, and that no wonder the place floods over and over and over again. It would seem to me that if that could be just channeled out, that there is enough altitude drop to completely eliminate all the flooding in Farmville. And I don't know what the permits and other things would be, I'm sure it would be terrible. But I just wanted to ask if anyone
I think we're
has
having a
considered
little
that.
bit of trouble hearing the proceedings.
Okay.
Ashley, it will be better in just a minute.
Okay, it'll be better in just a minute.
We'll keep talking.
Okay, thank you.
And that's really all I had. I just wondered if anyone had considered that, and if not, why not?
Yeah, I don't think so. Scott, that's something, if you don't mind, you can look into, and maybe the infrastructure committee can look into that. Because it involves more than just the town.
Yes.
I'll just make a quick comment, and that is, if it's a navigable river, I'm pretty sure that the Commonwealth of Virginia would have to have some type of approval in the Army Corps of Engineers as well.
Yeah. So anyway, if you just look into that. Thank you, Dr. Wells, a great suggestion. Okay, we ready to move forward with the presentation? Scott, are you introducing our guest?
I am. I was going to somewhat set the stage for them, and that is, if you'll remember back, I asked council if we could look at the Virginia retirement system as an opportunity to change our current retirement program that we have. In order to do that, we had to have a study done by them. Actually, they go through a third party, a consulting company, which you have before you. And they're going to go over that with you. In doing this, you can choose many options of what you're asking them to look at. And so in order to give you a greater perspective, being that we are not currently in, never have been obviously, is to look at 3 different scenarios of one, just being a prospective member under prospective status. The second one is anybody that is with the town and has been here up to 5 years, giving them credit, buying them credit, if you will, into the system, with however much time that they have in those 5 years, or buying everybody whole with the full amount of time. And just to give you an idea of what that would look like. I have spoken with them about the information. I could have attempted to explain this to you, but you would probably have some questions that I might not be able to answer. And so I have asked them to give you the presentation on this study, what our options are moving forward, and about the Virginia retirement system itself. So I had Ziane as the person, but I don't think she's on this call. So I'm going to turn it over to whoever is going to be leading it from the Virginia retirement system side.
I think we're frozen.
We're ready to begin the presentation.
Well, good morning. I hope you all can hear okay. This is Michael Cooper, Chief Operating Officer for the Virginia Retirement System. And I just wanted to thank you all, obviously, for inviting us today, but as well, making you comfortable while are staying safe and well during these difficult times. So, again, appreciate the opportunity to talk through the study results from the evaluation report that was provided to you. I just wanted to highlight quickly before turning it over to Rory Medora, a couple of things to keep in mind during today's discussion. First is that we're here in a neutral role. We're merely here to advise, provide information as it relates to the study results, what it means in terms of costs, and other implications for the 2020 PRS. But it obviously in no way is our intention to sway one way or the other. The decision is that of yours. The second point I'd like to emphasize is that the decision to join PRS is irrevocable. Sorry, it's a tongue twister. So when you think about the discussion and the decision that you ultimately make, you should be thinking about it beyond this point in time and this group of employees at present, because this will carry forward into the future for generations of employees to come. So I just wanted to emphasize those two items as you carry out today's meeting. And of course, as you go through this presentation or discussion of the report, we encourage you to stop us at any point and ask questions. I'll note we've had a little bit of difficulty hearing. I know that's the technical difficulties of the meeting layout, and so if you do have some questions, please shout out. Make sure we don't lose some, but we'll welcome any questions at any point during the discussion. So with that in mind, I'm going to turn it over to our senior staff actuary, Rory Medora, and Rory will walk through the results and talk in more detail about what they mean for you as you consider the decision today. So thank you again for your time, and I'm going to turn it over to Rory.
Can we ask one quick question before you do that?
They want to ask one quick question before you do that.
Okay.
Hey, will you go back and expand just a little bit on your comment about the decision is irrevocable and the fact that if we do go into it, there's no coming out, you're in perpetuity?
That's correct. And Rory, Andy, you can expand upon this if you choose, but the short answer is yes, once you make a decision to join VRS, you are in VRS. There's no going in and out of VRS. There's consequences for it, of course. For example, if you were to join VRS and then to leave, you created a liability, if you will, and in addition, then have left employees who would have gained VRS service and credit there's a variety of reasons, but most important is, yes, once you make a decision to join, you can't go in and out. The only times you really see that happen is if a political subdivision were to dissolve, go away. Even in those instances, quite candidly, what occurs is that another entity will take on those employees. So say, for example, if there is a water and sewer authority, it dissolves. Usually it's because it's then been taken over by another locality or another authority, and then those liabilities and assets of their plan are then absorbed by the locality or political subdivision that takes them over. So I mean, that's the rare instance of something like that that actually occur. Andy, Rory, did I miss anything on that?
No, I would just add that mechanically, part of why it's irrevocable is because the Virginia retirement system plans are a code-driven benefit plan. And so the Code of Virginia only offers really one way out of the plan, which is if a locality becomes insolvent, then the plan can be dissolved. And as Mike was saying, part of that process is that we seek a successor employer to make certain that the members are taken care of, that there's as little impact to those members as possible. But if one can't be found, then there's the code sets out how a plan can be solved. But essentially, the code really only gives that one way to leave the retirement system once an entity joins. And I think that part of why it's beneficial to have Rory in particular talk through some of the actuarial principles that lie behind the funding of the plan. The reason why the General Assembly would have just that one way out of VRS really has to do with how the plan is funded and the way the pre-funding works and all of that. If it was something where people could, where entities could just jump in and jump out, you would end up having what's the term, adverse selection sort of problem that could harm funding and the retirement benefits long term. So I hope that helps.
Yeah.
Okay. Again, I'm Roy Ventura, the Senior Staff Actuary, and I was just going to go over, I'm assuming that you all have a copy of the letter that was provided.
I'll go ahead and display it if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think if you go to to page 3, I think is where we'll primarily focus.
Okay, is everybody able to see the letter there? I'm going down to page 3. And I might make it a little smaller so we can get more information on the page here.
And I wanted to, before we went through the different results, I wanted to just touch at a high level a couple of points and some of the terminology that you see here on this exhibit. One of the things that Andy touched on a little bit was the fact that the VRS benefits provided through the pension plan are funded benefits, and what that means is that we look to collect the required either retirement benefits while a member over their career. And one of the points that you see on chart is called normal cost. And the normal cost essentially is the cost of 1 year's benefits for an individual. And so over their career, just as an example, if someone had a 20-year career, we would elect a piece or normal cost each of those 20 years, so that when they retired, those 20 payments, along with interest earned in the fund, would be able to fund their benefit during their retirement. One of the other things about VRS is that it has kind of changed over the years, and now there are 3 different benefit tiers within VRS. There's a Plan 1 benefit that is for people that were generally hired before 2010. There is a Plan 2 benefit that was for people that were hired after 2010 but prior to 2014. And then for anyone who is hired after January of 2014, we now have a hybrid plan. And those are for the general employees. And then in addition to that, as part of this study, there is also enhanced hazardous duty coverage that is a different level of benefits with different retirement eligibilities that also have 2 different tiers under those. There's a Plan 1 and a Plan 2. Hazardous duty individuals, if you elect the enhanced hazardous duty coverage, are not eligible to be in the hybrid plan. And so when we develop rates, we actually blend the cost of all 3 of those benefit tiers, plus if there's enhanced hazardous duty coverage, we blend those in to create one rate for the employer to pay. So that is also something to keep in mind. One of the other things that's on here that you'll see discussed is actuarial accrued liability or unfunded actuarial accrued liability. And you can really just think of the actuarial accrued liability as those normal cost payments that you make each year. Once you pay the normal cost and it goes into the fund, the normal cost essentially becomes accrued or earned liability to the plan. And so that's the accrued liability. And then unfunded accrued liability would be any liabilities under the plan that are not covered by assets in the fund. And we have as part of our funding, whenever there is unfunded liability in the fund, we have amortization methods that we use that allows you to pay back any unfunded liabilities over, generally it's over a 20-year period. And the only change to that would be in these instances where you're coming employer, some of the that some of these options create an unfunded liability at the effective date of the plan. And the unfunded liabilities at the effective date of the plan are actually amortized over a 10-year period. And we can talk a little bit more about that as we go through the different scenarios. So with that as a backdrop, I was just going to go through the 3 different options that are in this exhibit. The first one, where we talk about prospective service only, would mean that the 135 individuals that come into a plan on February 1st, 2021, I believe is the effective date that you're looking at. And they would start earning service as of that point in time. And so the plan would have no unfunded liability or accrued liability at that time. And the benefit would be paid for by that normal cost payment. And so it would be kind of going forward, you would pay the normal cost, and that would go into the fund. And so you would have no unfunded accrued liability. And so you've got the normal cost rate. And then the members also have to contribute you're a Plan 1 or Plan 2 member, it all goes into the DB plan. If you're a hybrid member, 4% of it goes into the defined benefit plan, and then 1% goes into a defined contribution component. And then you'll also see there's an administrative expense charge that's on there, which is just the cost associated with the IRS, administering the plan. And then you'll also see that there's a DC match for hybrid members, which the hybrid plan has a mandatory 1% match for the employer, and that's what that represents. And so the first year cost would be the 7.87% of payroll, because we typically show the cost as a percentage of payroll and collect the funding as a percent of payroll. And so the estimated first year cost would be approximately $400. Are there any questions about that scenario?
Any questions?
Figuring none, I'll go to the next column. And the only difference between the first column and the second column, it includes a provision where you grant up to years of service. Just note, when we receive the data for the town of Farmville, I think, if I remember correctly, that the average service for all the employees was about 15 years. And so granting 5 years of that, you would essentially have quite a few people coming in with 5 years of service. And you can see that if you give 5 years of service right off the bat, that's going to create a liability for which there aren't any assets to cover that. And so the liability that's generated is about $2.6 million. And part of our funding provisions for new employers when they come into the plan is that they are at least 75% funded. So if you were to grant 5 years of service, we would be required to collect $1.9 million to go against that granting of 5 years of service. And the remainder of the unfunded liability that was generated by granting the service, you would be able to amortize or pay off over a 10-year period. And so that if we go down and look at the normal cost rates associated with these, you'll now notice that the normal cost rate has dropped a little bit, and the reason for that, as I talked about earlier, is that we collect the normal cost payments over a member's working career, and by granting 5 years of service, you've essentially spread that cost over an additional 5-year period, and so the rate goes down a little bit. You'll also notice that the unfunded accrued liability rate there is the amortizing that unfunded liability over a 10-year period. That's the first payment of that. And the admin expenses and DC match remain the same, and so that the estimated rate would increase to 8.43%, and the first year cost would be approximately $514,000 in addition to the one-time payment of $1.9 million. Any questions about that scenario?
If I calculate that right, it's gonna cost us $76,000 a year to carry that $642,000 liability. That's 1.25% of payroll.
If there was a
At the
question
end of
there,
page,
I didn't catch it.
No, I That's kind of a high cost.
Yeah, they're not asking the question, he was making a comment.
No questions at this time.
Okay, thank you. And then the scenario that's listed on here is a rent, prior service going back to date of hire with the town of Farmville. And you'll see that this scenario, actually, creates an accrued liability of $13.4 million, which would require an initial contribution of a little over $10 million. And then you would have $3.3 million of still unfunded liability that would be amortized over 10 years. And again, the reason that the liability is so high is that, again, we look to try to fund these benefits over a person's career. And there's several people that have worked for the town for many years and actually are probably would be able to retire immediately. If this was enacted in February, and so they would essentially have a retirement benefit that wouldn't have any assets in the fund to pay for. And so in order to meet the provision of being 75% funded, we would need to have a $10 million contribution put into the fund in order to pay, which would likely be benefits for people, in short order, that we hadn't previously collected any money for. And so this scenario, you see a much larger unfunded amortization rate because there's a bigger unfunded liability, and the 1 year cost would be about $791,000. Again, with a one-time payment of just over $10 million into the fund. And then it's also important to note that we do these valuations going forward on an annual basis. In odd number years, we actually set rates for a 2-year period. And then in the even number years, we kind of do an informational valuation that just kind of shows you, which way things are trending. And in any given year, there's going to be actuarial gains and losses, not only due to, investment returns, but then there's also demographic gains and losses that occur. Because when we do these valuations, we're taking your population and trying to make assumptions on, how long they're going to work, when they're going to retire, how long they're going to be in retirement. And so we have a fair amount of credible data across all of the VRS plans, but, in any given year, there's going to be gains or losses around those assumptions. And those gains and losses will, effectively move your contribution rate either up or down, in future years, depending on plan experience. So, even if you're starting out with one of these annual costs of 7.87, 8.43, or 12.96, it's important to note that that rate could change in the future for a number of reasons.
Any questions? question. Over the years, I also know that VRS has had to do special assessments. Can you speak about those and tell us how frequently that has happened, particularly in lean times, as the fund has fallen? You go back and do a special assessment to get the fund back to a certain level.
The political subdivision plans, which you would fall under, the political subdivision plans, are required by statute to contribute the actuarial determined contribution. And so, what goes on in statewide plans is a little bit different than what we see in the political subdivision plans. Political subdivision plans actually have because they are required in the actuarial determined contribution, have actually fared much better over the years, even during some of these downturns. And I think if you look at our local subdivision plans, the average funded status for most of the plan, I think the average is 90%, but there's a fair amount of the plans that are actually over 100% funded. And so there are rare instances, there are a handful of political subdivision plans that most of them started many years ago, and for whatever reason, some of it had to do with plan demographics, some of it had to do with many years ago, they used to let plans come in and they would grant prior service, and they did not require them to meet a certain funding threshold, and we've seen that some of those plans that did that have struggled over the years because they created a big unfunded liability and have been unable to dig themselves out of it, which is one of the reasons why we require plans to be at least 75% funded when they come in, just so that they don't have that sort of problem in the future. In those plans, which are typically only, probably about 50% funded, we do have instances where we have surcharges applied to those plans to try to get them to a better funded status. But really, that's only a handful of plans that we see that. And then if you look at the statewide plans, the state retirement plan and the teachers, those pooled plans, the funding for those, over the last 25 years has not been always at the required level, which has gotten them into a little bit of a different funding situation than a lot of the political subdivision plans. So I guess the short answer is, we typically don't see a lot of the surcharges on the political subdivision plans because they are required to put in the required contribution, and frankly, because of that, I think their contribution amounts have generally been relatively level as compared to what you see with the statewide plans.
And so my question is, can the employees take their money out of what they've already got invested in now and put it towards?
So the question is, can employees, this is my assumption. Councilwoman Amos is asking if we go with the first plan, which is not buying back any of their time, can an employee take money from their current defined contribution plan that the town has now and buy back time? And I'm assuming the answer to that question is if an employee buys time, if the town does not buy time, an employee can only buy up to 4 years of service on their own, correct?
That is correct. Yeah, we have a process here where if an individual wanted to buy back time, we actually do a calculation for them that lets them know what the cost would be to purchase the service, and then they have the option to, whether or not they want to move forward with the purchase.
So what happens to their money? Say we go with the most expensive plan, say that, what happens to their money that's already in their account?
Well, their current defined contribution plan is stays. The town would just not contribute any longer. And most localities that have VRS also offer an option for deferred compensation, which that fund that we already have, those employees already have, or any new employee, if we keep that with the company we currently have, that could be another option. But they would only put whatever they wanted, the town would not match that any longer. Would be my suggested policy decision to you, because your retirement then would be that the town is making the contribution to is VRS, which is the primary retirement system.
It may be important to add that employees that are with the town at the time that the town joins VRS do have the option to opt out of VRS coverage. So if you have some employees that would prefer not to come into VRS for whatever reason, they have some flexibility there. So as they come in, they can both purchase some service credit with VRS based on the purchase of prior service rules, and they would have the ability, if they see it as more advantageous to them, not to come to VRS, to opt out.
But at that point, we would not, if you choose this policy decision, we would be matching their money in the other system, the other plan. I would also say that, and to add to that, if a certain percentage doesn't come in, then, I mean, it's kind of a red flag for you all to say you really want to be in Virginia retirement system. If over half the employees that are here decide, no, we're not going to do that.
I don't think we've ever seen that happen. When folks join, generally, folks are pretty happy to come into the retirement system. I suppose that if we had, very low uptake, it would certainly wreak havoc with some of the actuarial assumptions that for the plan. Over time, the code requires that as if folks opt out of the plan, they're opting out for themselves. The position is covered, and so as new people are hired into those positions, they can be covered in the future. And so, with those new people coming in, they wouldn't have the option. The code mandates coverage in those positions. So it's a cohort of people that opted out over time that will correct itself.
The other question some of you may have is, we also have employees, as you know, that have already retired and draw their VRS pension. If we were to go to VRS as our retirement system, those employees, and correct me if I'm wrong, gentlemen, those employees also have the option of continuing to draw their VRS and stay a full-time employee with the town because we're becoming a prospective member, and they were already an employee prior. But any future employee, once we're in VRS, would not be able to opt out of VRS and still get their pension.
Correct. So if you have folks today who are retirees, because they have this option to opt out of VRS coverage, they would have incentive to do so, opt out of the coverage, because they're receiving a retirement benefit, and that they would be able to do that, and then that would. But that, again, that would only apply to them. After that point, after you leave or have a separation of service, then it becomes mandatory for whoever is the next incumbent in the position to be covered by VRS benefits. And so we have around that required that somebody who retires from a covered position and has the VRS retirement benefit is able to come back to work for a VRS covered employer, but they can only come back in a part-time role. So they work 80% or less of a full-time position. They go back to the exact same role that they had before. They have to actually separate from their position and all of that. And if they're coming back, if they've retired from the town of Farmville and they want to come back to the town of Farmville, they have to have at least a 1 full calendar month break in service before they can do so. They have to genuinely separate from covered service, begin their retirement benefit, and come back. And then the other piece of this can be is that as the employer, you can't prearrange somebody's return to work. So if somebody's retiring, you really have to let them go ahead and retire. And then, after 1 full calendar month or longer, if you happen to have a part-time position that they are an excellent candidate for and they apply, you can bring them back and then otherwise make certain that they're working part-time hours and not going into that full-time status. So those are the retiree return to work rules. Generally, if you have somebody who's currently a VRS retiree who opts out at this point, then they're opting out of becoming a VRS covered person again, and they're able to maintain their employment. So I think that covers the retiree question pretty well,
Yeah.
unless you have other.
Gotcha, thank you. Yeah, okay. Let's walk back through this just a second, and for us, at least for me, this distills down pretty quickly. Plan 3, requiring the town to put in $10 million up front, is off the table. Plan 2, requiring the town to put in $2 million, is off the table because we don't have $2 million. So basically, the town can look at Plan 1, which, if I'm reading it right, everybody starts like as a new employee day 1 going into the system.
Unless you have prior service.
Unless you have prior service, and employees can buy back up to 4 years of their money, with their money. And roughly it would cost us $480,000 a year for the plan as of now, for the town's contribution.
Correct.
What are fees to get into it? Setup fees? What are the costs to get into it? This is the contribution. Are there any other fees?
There is a cost for, and I'm sorry, I don't have them just in front of me. There is a cost for the Virginia Local Disability Plan, VLDP. And so part of the coverage for a hybrid member, it includes this Virginia Local Disability. And so what that does is it's Plan 1 and Plan 2 employees have access to disability retirement. I'm looking at the study here. Hybrid plan employees have access to this VLDP program. And what it does is it provides, instead of providing a retirement benefit if somebody's disabled, if somebody goes out on medical leave without pay, the VLDP program provides income replacement for that person, and they continue to accrue service credit in VRS until the point that they reach retirement age. And it has It is designed to encourage an employee to return back to work when they're able to. And so it ends up being a lower cost disability option, disability plan than disability retirement is. And those plan 1 and plan 2 sort of helps to provide some protections, those protections, those income protections for the member without more living costs to the employers that were part of the disability retirement. And so that has a rate associated with it too. And Scott, I'll have to follow up with you with that because I just don't have it in front of me at the moment. And then
Let me ask you a question on that piece. We currently already have short-term disability that we cover, that we have here now. So if with VRS, we could do away with that additional short-term disability coverage?
well, that's a decision that I don't feel comfortable, opining on. You'd have to look at that coverage and how that, whether or not once you have these VRS benefits, whether or not that coverage still makes sense and still provides what you're hoping to provide. I think certainly as you come into VRS, knowing that BLDP is part of that for those hybrid plan employees, that it's appropriate to review it at that time. But I can't opine about what would be best for you.
I understand.
Other questions?
I just wanted to point out, while we have them too, we talked about those with prior service. So and they can help explain this better than I probably will to you. If you look on page 2 of the report, it tells you of all the current members, of all the current employees that are with the town, and some of those have already changed since this was done, obviously, either from retirement or whatnot else. If we went to VRS, you would have 6 current employees in Plan 1. You would have 2 employees in Plan 2, 99 that could be in the new plan because they're coming in without any prior service from any other locality or state service. And then the hazardous duty plans 1 and 2 that have prior service. But where they have their service prior carries the liability. So the town would not take on any existing liability from their prior service. It's only the service that will begin under VRS with the town. Is that accurate?
That's correct. When we actually allocate costs, we do allocate it based on where the service was earned. And so if they got service with another VRS employer, that other VRS employer keeps the liability that's associated with it for at the other employer.
Okay. Any other questions? Anybody? Anything else before we let them go?
As long as you all don't have any questions for them, I have a little comment for all of you.
Anybody have any other questions for the VRS guys? Anybody? Okay. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for the presentation. Obviously, it's a lot of material and numbers for council to digest, and it'll take us some time to process and digest, but I'm sure Scott will be back in touch.
Thank you all again, and as you know, this is a significant decision of council, and so as you continue to think through this, should you have any additional questions or need for additional information, please do not hesitate to reach out to us. That's what we're here for. We're happy to assist in any way that we can.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Okay.
I just, I want to draw your attention, first I want to make a few statements and then draw your attention to some other material that I provided all of you. I do understand that this is a big commitment and a big decision for all of you to make. But I think it's a decision that you have to look at it from a lens of not just current employees, but future employees that will work for the town. And what I mean by that is that our ability to attract in the future employees with experience to come to Farmville in different areas and to retain them is going to matter about anybody that has local government experience. It's going to matter that they can continue with a retirement plan that they have a certain amount of years in. And I don't think some of the positions that I'm going to name will mind, because I've had this discussion with them. But as we all know, we have, and they mentioned it in looking at our demographics, we have a population of employees that are eligible almost today, or they would have already retired had we had Virginia retirement system probably. But we have a group of employees that will be ready to retire within the next 2 to 5 years. A pretty large change in employees. And some in positions that you would probably want skilled and knowledgeable folks leading departments in those positions with prior experience in local government. And that's going to be difficult to attract them without this type of benefit. One of the other things I will tell you that we don't have, that we are going to have to compete even more in the times that we're in, and that's public safety. Public safety in most other localities, because they're in VRS, have a slightly different benefit. Men and women, and I can say this because I've done the job before and I've worked with people that have sat in a fire truck and jumped out in a police car and jumped out, don't really want to be doing that at 60, 65 years old. And so part of that hazardous duty benefit that's incorporated in that is so that they can retire at an age that allows them to not have some of the difficulties that some of those do. And this is not an age discrimination type thing, this is just fact. And with that enhanced benefit, it allows them to retire at an age where they are able to do so, and at an age that they may not be putting a liability on where they're working necessarily, in what they're doing, the type of job they're doing. And I know you've seen the numbers and the 3 benefits. I gave you those 3 benefits, as I said in the beginning, to give you an idea of what we would be looking at and options. Not options that we definitively had to go with, but 3 distinct options of different periods of time in an employee's cycle. And the reason I picked 5 years is because 5 years is when you're vested in the retirement system. The other end is because of the bulk of our employees, to let you know how much it would really cost if we bought everybody's time and how much they had in the tank. The other is just to get us in the door. It goes back to my original part of this, of being able to attract and retain employees in local government that we're competing with throughout the Commonwealth. I didn't include it in this. I gave it to the Finance Committee long ago of how many localities in Virginia have VRS compared to those that do not. And we're in a small pool right now that do not, of localities in Virginia. I would stand here and tell you today that prospective status is the only one that we can afford, and the only one that I think we have an option to do moving forward at this point. In saying that, I do realize that it is going to be almost double of the cost that we currently put into retirement today. But the reason for that is because not everybody now has to be in our retirement plan. And by doing that, I believe that there are people that are here still working, that are working not only because they enjoy working for the town, which is a great place to work, but they may not be able to retire. They may not be monetarily eligible, ready, and able to retire. Virginia retirement system does help with that because they are having the ability to retire. Our current system does not, we cannot make them in that system. And that currently only has 87 employees in it at $220,474.97. However, there's two additional documents I gave you. The one I read that off to you from. The other is Carol Ann reached out to the Virginia Government Finance Officers Association, and Town of Benton finance director was, when they had this conversation, said everybody should need to know this. So they put together in the last week and a half, sent out a listserv and said, hey, what all insurances do y'all have and what percentages is your locality paying? We have really good insurance. We also provide really good payment toward the employee and their family plans. And I think what I'm getting ready to tell you is options of where there is money and other benefits to make a retirement benefit, which is at the end of the day, in the future, the biggest benefit plan for somebody at the end of the day. I think we have the ability to change some of our insurance contribution rates to absorb some of that additional funds that VRS will cost us. We've already cut out the annual Christmas bonus for this year because of budgetary reasons. I don't see where we couldn't continue not to do that. I'll tell you, most localities in Virginia that I know of, local government traditionally doesn't give bonuses for something like that. And then the other one is, we're very rich in the pay in lieu of insurance. We have 34 employees that don't take any insurance, and the cost for a year is $323,260.03. I think we can reduce that amount as well. There are places that give $1,000 a year or $2,000 a year, but not $8,000 to $9,000 a year. So my suggestion is, from a policy decision that I'm requesting and suggesting to you all, is that we take a really hard look at switching our retirement to Virginia retirement system, and not in February. I had to give them a date, and for numbers to be more accurate, they liked a date that was closer to when they were doing the study. We can do it that's tied to the budget, and we can be effective July 1st, so that we can budget this for the new year. I would just say, as we're doing that budget, that we take into consideration of joining VRS as a prospective status. We look at where we can have other benefits that are in line with other localities as far as insurance and what we contribute. And the pay in lieu of insurance at not such a high rate. And I think we will come up with not only enough to cover the difference that VRS is going to be over the current retirement, but also some other savings that we could look at whether that can go towards a percent of a pay increase for employees in the next budget year or not, that we didn't give this year because of where we are in this crisis. But I want to thank you for considering it, and I appreciate the time VRS has spent with us, and open for any questions.
Let's just kind of go around the table, but, you know, this will probably be, or potentially could be, the biggest financial decision that this council ever makes, because it's into perpetuity. If we elect to go into VRS, you don't get out. And so for generations to come, they'll, you know, the town will wrestle with funding and how it works. So we can't make this decision lightly or quickly. But let's just go around the table, and Donald, we'll start with you, and let's get some feedback on what we've seen, what we've heard, and what council's thoughts are.
Well, my thoughts on it goes back to 2004 when I first got on council. And I tried to convince those that were on council that the price to get in VRS at that time was only going to increase. And it's not only increased, it's quadrupled. But in some of the things that Scott just mentioned was in reference to what we were paying back then, because we were paying for, especially for insurance, we were paying for the employee and the family. And I argued then that, okay, we can take some of this money and pay for our employees' future instead of paying for their insurance right now. Insurance is good right now, but what are they going to do in retirement? The retirement plan was nothing compared to VRS. And it's still, in my opinion, nothing compared to VRS. Of course, they're going to get a retirement plan, but look how long they have to wait to get it. So I say again, and my opinion on this is, okay, it's a cost to get in again now, but in 2034, it's going to be a higher cost. So yeah, it is a big decision. I don't have the answer right now. I thought the answer back in 2004 was the best answer we could have made to get in this system. And I know we can't go back to then to make that decision, but we have to collectively do something right now.
I definitely, I see Scott's point regarding recruitment and retention of future employees and looking towards the future. And I think we've bounced around this idea and skirted around this idea of the health insurance issue a couple of times, but we've never, not sure, at least in my short time here, we haven't dived head first into it and really sussed it out. And I have some interest in peeking into that and seeing what layers there we can peel back to open up some money. And I agree. I mean, we're now in a small pool of people who are not a participant in VRS. Does that cost increase as time goes on? At some point, another council somewhere down the line has to make this decision, and now they're paying more. It's not, I have a hard time anytime I'm presented with a bunch of information and a bunch of numbers making any sort of rash decision, so I'm not going to offer any real insight into what I'm thinking at this moment, but I do look forward to diving into this a little bit more, and I think it is something that we, while it's a big decision, a little forward thinking is probably for the best.
I think that this has merit, but I think this is going to take some serious consideration. We're going to have to look at our revenues, where this money's going to come from, how we're going to be creative as far as to be able to do this if we are inclined to do it. I don't think it's something that we can do overnight. I think it's going to to take a lot of deliberation, a lot of soul searching as far as to see what the town itself can financially bear as far as to be able to afford this. And until we get those facts and be able to have time to digest this, I cannot really say clearly which way I would want to go until I see further investigation into it.
It's been out there before, but I think it's something that we need to take time to study. I'm rushing to it, we need to study it hard, so.
I certainly understand the challenges you have for specialty type positions. I understand attracting, retaining. I deal with that every day. I'm also concerned when we put numbers out here of what we can save if you actually hurt more of the staff that are taking advantage of these benefits versus the benefit of being in the retirement. And how many of these that are getting the insurance would then turn around and opt to enroll in the insurance because they don't want to give up the benefit? So it's not a true, I don't think it's a true savings to say, well, all 300 and some thousand is going to not go out the teal. I don't like to be tied down, and that's basically when you get into the VRS, you are locked in. You don't have much flexibility when it comes to being able to try to be a little bit more efficient, looking at your expenses. Your payroll costs are there, and this is what they assess, and this is what you pay. I would rather take a look at other ways using the current vehicle that we have. So there's certainly ways that we can do contributions for every employee that's eligible, whether they're actually deferring or not. And I would rather hear from our 401 financial advisor on what options we have there for retirement for the employees. I'm one that I believe that an employee needs to participate somewhat in a retirement and not fully a retirement system by an employer. Those systems are outdated, they're expensive, it goes back onto the businesses and the taxpayers in this area that will have to burden that cost. And I think we have to do our due diligence to make sure that we get something that's also going to be equitable to the people that are writing checks on there. And you know, if the VRS is the only reason someone wants to come here and work in Farmville, I would question why they're coming. Because I would hope that they would be coming because of our community and because of everything else that we have to offer and not just a retirement system. So we need to take a look at recruiting a little bit more of what we have to offer and how we're recruiting those particular positions. So I have a lot of concerns about, you know, committing to this long-term expenditure. I mean, I think in theory it sounds like a great idea. I mean, I think we're all on the same page that a good deal more thought needs to go into it. I think that certainly trying to think of ways to close that gap between the $480,000 this would cost us annually based on, I guess, today's dollars and what we're currently paying. Personally, I would like to, you know, going forward, if we're going to have discussions, I know I'd like to be a part of it, maybe all council would like to be a part of it, but I think it's a lot of things to discuss. I would like to hear that process all the way through so I can make a decision.
Thank you, Scott. That was a great presentation, and that was a great presentation. The recruitment and retention is valuable, and I'm living through the VRS. I retired at 50, and I'm a hazardous student. And I know we have one other council member that is benefiting from VRS with the hazardous duty as well. I think this should have been done a long time ago. I think that, you know, when we recruit law enforcement here, they have to have something to look forward to, and you know, it's we're in a day now, age and time that, it's hard to get law enforcement officers to even want to do the job, and just to have this benefit is fabulous, and, I think we should move forward with it, and I know it's a big decision to make, but, yeah, I agree with Hunter. I mean, this should have been done a long, long time ago. So I'm definitely going to push forward to make VRS happen. That's going to be my vote.
I think that everybody wants more information. Sorry. Scott, can you, from the discussion today, can you bring forward some more information, particularly, I think, on insurance? That's a big, that we've discussed that for years about what we pay on insurance. It's got to be a balancing act. I mean, the town just doesn't have the money to fund it. So you got to figure out where the funding is coming from. Also, our current retirement provider, maybe they can come and talk to us as well. I think that we not need to just look at retirement. I think we have to look at the whole package. I think we have to look at insurance and everything together and come up with something that is feasible for the employee and the taxpayer.
So,
And it's not an easy task.
so I guess my question is a little bit more clear guidance and how to move forward. Is council willing for me to look at some of the same percentages from the study of other localities? Because obviously, if you look at our percentages, we're higher than some in some areas and lower in others. So, are you looking for me to try to give you a happy medium of percentages and what that would cost for the employee versus the cost of the town?
Yeah, I think so. And if we go to VRS, how is it revenue neutral? I mean, that's, I think, the bottom line is that the town doesn't have additional funding to put into a retirement plan. It has to be revenue neutral. There has to be take here to give here. You know, everybody sort of on that page, absolutely.
I mean, the other thing to look at too is we can pull and say, okay, if everybody participated in the current plan, which would be my hope, but they don't, what would that truly cost us now? I mean, luckily we're only paying $220, but that's only 87 employees. We have 130 some employees. So if everybody was actually participating, that number would be higher anyway.
Yeah, this discussion goes back from my beginning on council 27 years ago. And I drove the discussion back then, about participation. And I was shocked when I first came on council and got involved in this, that how few people were participating in a retirement plan. And I wanted back then to make it mandatory that everybody, because you can work for the town all these years and have nothing but Social Security. You can walk away and that's all you have. At the end of the day, the law prohibits that, as I learned then, and as we know now. You cannot force people to contribute and be a part of the retirement plan. And I know back then, Mr. Reed may remember, we did some things, brought on a different retirement person. When I first came on, the town was doing its own investing. I was on the finance committee, and Mr. Wall, Mr. Whitaker, and Mr. Newman, and I would pick CD rates and everything. So we've come a long ways from the days when we invested the town's retirement to going to an outside vendor, and employees have many more options now and ways to invest their retirement. But I guess the VRS is the next step. And but how you fund that has always been, Mr. Reed, you and I are really two there that go back that far, but that's always been the discussion, is how do you fund it? And where does the money come from to fund it? And I think that's the key still today, is where's the money come from? How do you fund it is a pretty huge liability, and it's an eternal commitment. Once you're in, you're in. And so I think that's what you have to figure out how we do. And it is for the future. I mean, VRS will not help many of the current employees, you know, because you said in the next 2 to 5 years, there's going to be a huge number of retirements. You've got to be in VRS, 5 years before you're vested? So there's a lot of employees that VRS is not going to help because we're past that time. It's for the future. It's looking to the next generation is what VRS is looking for. There's no way the town can buy back the service at $10 million. That's just not plausible. At $2 million for 5-year service is not plausible. It's just not there. I mean, you would have to raise real estate taxes about 4 times what they are to go and buy that service back, and you know, there'd be a lynch mob at the door if that be the case. So if you can figure out a plan, if you can look at options, talk to our current retirement vendor. It's not a decision, I think Brian said, that, you know, we're going to make overnight. It's a huge commitment, and there's a lot more information that needs to come forward. A lot more things to consider. Anybody else? Is that the track you all want to take? Is more information? Let's look at other options. Talk to our vendors.
Is work session the avenue that y'all would like to do this as a whole?
Yeah, I think so. I think that Mr. Dwyer made a good point. It would be better for all of council to be privy to all the discussion and all the information, and I think that work session is probably the best avenue to do that.
Mr. Davis, any way we can get a list of the towns that is not in VRS?
It's easier for me to give you the places that are. Because those are listed through them. That's the easiest way. But
That's fine.
There's got to be some out there that are not, though.
I know that's,
Yeah, that'd be nice to have that information.
that's what I wanted, but he says,
I tell you what, we can go through the catalog of all the counties, cities, and towns in Virginia and mark off the ones that are, and then I'll give you.
that's fine.
That'll work.
We'll do that.
All right, Mr. Davis, anything else you have on the agenda?
I had one other topic I wanted to just share with you all that I hope you don't have any disagreement in this from an operational standpoint. And it's very small and minute, but I just wanted to give you an idea of what I'd like to do and hoping to do. Is, you know, we send out letters of congratulations, letters of complaints, letters of you're in violation of this zoning ordinance, and the letterhead has every elected member's name on it, and I don't know that that's probably the right way to do that. I think council should have their own letterhead for their purposes. I think that each department should have their own letterhead for whatever service that they're providing. So if it's community development, I think community development should have from zoning to building inspector and all of those with whoever's leading that area. But my standpoint is that it's all going to be uniform. They're all going to look the same from the town. But that it will not be just from looking like it's coming, the letterhead is the council and my name at the top of every single letter, even though it's signed by somebody else. I think it looks better if it's coming from that area that it's pertaining to. And I'd like to kind of start making that change.
I have no objections. You might have any objections? Chief, I think the police department uses their own stationery currently, right?
No, we're using the town, so it's got the Florida Police Department and the on the side of it. But it's still got all the council.
Yeah, that's fine.
So theirs is a little different, but we will, my goal is for everybody to be similar in how it's set up, and so we'll work on that from the department. The current one for y'all will not change,
Anything else?
unless you want it. No.
We won't specifically go around the table. Does anybody have anything? bring up.
This, finance committee is supposed to be the week between Christmas and New Year's. I don't think that cancel that. I don't see any reason, unless you see a reason we need to meet this month, that we don't have finance ordinance meeting.
No, we put in this morning, I sent an email, and it's in your Dropbox. I think our variable revenues are doing well.
Yeah.
And we're keeping our expenses in line, so I would not see any reason.
Actually, our revenues are only off by about 8.4% of this time last year. So, very well, and we're above budget, so we've done very well on that. So no meeting, no finance meeting in the month of December. Okay. I'll entertain, if no one else has anything, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second. Motion second, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Ayes have it, meeting adjourned.
Oh, yeah, we're still.